when desperate single dad Marcus asked the kind stranger at the hospital to watch his 4-year-old son for just 5 minutes. Neither of them knew those 5 minutes would save both their lives in ways they never imagined. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's emergency room buzzed like angry wasps, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow that made even healthy people look half dead. Marcus Chen clutched his 4-year-old son Caleb against his chest, feeling the boy's fevered body burn through the thin fabric of his Superman pajamas. The smell of disinfectant and something sharper fear maybe hung thick in the air as he stumbled through the automatic doors that seemed to take forever to part. Caleb's head lolled against Marcus's shoulder, his usually bright eyes glassy and unfocused. The fever had spiked again during the drive, and Marcus could feel his son's small body trembling despite the heat radiating from his skin. 3 days. 3 days of watching his little boy get worse, of sleepless nights spent pressing cool washcloths to burning foreheads, of measuring out children's Tylenol every 4 hours like it was liquid gold. The pediatrician's office had been booked solid, the nurse on the phone dismissive. Keep giving him fluids and fever reducer. Bring him in if it hits 104. It had hit 104 an hour ago. The emergency room was chaos wrapped in the thin veneer of medical efficiency. Families clustered in uncomfortable plastic chairs, some crying softly, others staring at wall-mounted televisions playing muted morning shows. A man in construction clothes held a bloody towel to his hand while scrolling through his phone with the other. An elderly woman sat alone, her walker positioned carefully beside her chair, watching the door like she was waiting for someone who might never come. Marcus approached the registration desk, where a tired-looking woman with steel-gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain looked up from her computer screen. Her name tag read, Sandra, and her expression suggested she'd seen everything at least twice. "I need help," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from 3 nights of worry. "My son, he's burning up. His fever won't break." Sandra's eyes softened slightly as she looked at Caleb, whose dark hair was matted with sweat, his olive skin flushed with unnatural pink. "How long has he had the fever?" 3 days. It just keeps getting higher." She handed him a clipboard thick with forms. "I'll need you to fill these out completely. Insurance cards, ID, emergency contacts. The triage nurse will see you as soon as—" "Wait." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he patted his pockets frantically. Walleties, keysies. But the small leather folder where he kept their insurance cards, the one he always grabbed from the kitchen counter. "I think I left our insurance information in the car." "I was in such a hurry." Sandra's expression hardened back into professional efficiency. "I'm sorry, but we need proof of insurance before we can register him. It's hospital policy." "But he's sick. Look at him." Marcus shifted Caleb in his arms, the boy's breathing shallow and rapid. "Can't you just—" "Sir, I understand you're worried, but I have to follow protocol. If you can bring me the insurance cards, we'll get you processed immediately." Marcus looked around the crowded waiting room, then back at Sandra. "How long will that take?" "Depends on how busy the doctors are. Could be an hour, could be 3. 3 hours. Marcus felt panic crawl up his throat like bile. Caleb didn't have 3 hours. Hell, Marcus wasn't sure he had 30 minutes. The boy had barely responded when Marcus tried to wake him that morning, his eyes rolling back before focusing with obvious effort. "I'll be right back," Marcus said, his mind already racing. "My car's in the parking structure. 5 minutes? Maybe 10. "Take your time," Sandra said, already turning to the next person in line. "We'll be here." Marcus turned away from the desk, Caleb heavy in his arms, heavier than a 4-year-old should be. The waiting room stretched before him like an obstacle course of worried families and scattered toys. He couldn't take Caleb back to the Carnot in this condition, not with the fever spiking. But he couldn't leave him alone either. The boy could barely lift his head. That's when he saw her. She sat in the corner, away from the main cluster of families, in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs that were somehow worse than sitting on the floor. She was maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that suggested she'd dressed quickly: jeans, a simple blue sweater, sneakers that had seen better days. But there was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that suggested she wasn't here for the same reasons as everyone else. While other people fidgeted or stared at their phones or whispered anxiously to companions, she sat still, watching, alert in a way that reminded Marcus of his old Army medic buddies, people who'd learned to see what others missed. She was alone, which meant she wouldn't be distracted by her own crisis. She looked kind, or at least not unkind. Most importantly, she was there, and Marcus was out of options. He approached her slowly, acutely aware of how he must look unshaven, still in yesterday's work clothes, holding a sick child like a shield against the world. The woman looked up as he neared, her dark eyes immediately going to Caleb with the kind of focused attention that made Marcus's decision for him. "I'm sorry to bother you," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need help." She tilted her head slightly, waiting. "I'm Marcus, and this is my son Caleb. He's been sick for 3 days, and I just realized I left our insurance cards in my car. They won't register him without them, and I can't take him back out there, he's too weak. Would you?" He swallowed hard, hating that he had to ask, hating that the world had come to this. "Would you watch him for 5 minutes while I run to get them? I know you don't know us, and I know how this looks, but—" "Of course," she said simply, already standing up. Her voice was calm, steady, with just a trace of an accent Marcus couldn't place. "Of course I'll watch him." The relief that flooded through Marcus was so intense he nearly staggered. "Thank you. God, thank you. I'll be so fast." "Take your time," she said, extending her arms. "Do what you need to do." Marcus hesitated for just a moment. 3 days ago, the idea of handing his son to a complete stranger would have been unthinkable. But 3 days ago, Caleb had been running around their small apartment, knocking over furniture and demanding pancakes for every meal. 3 days ago, Marcus had still believed in the luxury of caution. Carefully, he transferred Caleb to the woman's arms. The boy stirred slightly, his fever-bright eyes opening just enough to register the change before drifting closed again. The woman adjusted her hold instinctively, supporting his head, positioning him so his breathing wouldn't be restricted. She'd done this before, Marcus realized. Maybe she was a mother herself. "His name's Caleb," Marcus said again, as if repeating it would somehow keep his son safe. "He's 4. If he wakes up scared—" "I'll tell him you went to get something from the car and you'll be right back," she said. "The truth is usually best with children." Marcus nodded, backing away slowly. "I'll be fast. 5 minutes. "Take 10, she said, settling back into her chair with Caleb in her arms. "We'll be fine." As Marcus hurried toward the exit, he turned back once to see the woman adjusting Caleb's position again, her hand coming up to feel his forehead with the practiced motion of someone who knew what they were looking for. For a moment, her expression shifted just slightly, so quickly Marcus might have imagined it into something that looked almost like concern. But then she caught him watching and gave him a small, reassuring nod. The parking structure was a concrete maze that smelled of exhaust and rain. Marcus ran, his work boots echoing off the low ceiling, past rows of cars that all looked the same in the artificial light. His truck sat in the back corner where he'd left it, doors unlocked because he'd been too panicked to remember basic security. The insurance folder sat on the passenger seat where it always rode, mocking him with its accessibility. He grabbed it and ran back, his chest burning by the time he reached the hospital entrance. The automatic doors seemed to move even slower this time, as if the building itself was conspiring to keep him from his son. The waiting room looked exactly the same families, same controlled chaos, same buzz of fluorescent lights, but somehow different, because now Caleb was part of it without him. Marcus spotted them immediately. The woman sat in the same chair, but she'd moved Caleb to a different position, his head resting against her shoulder at an angle that looked more comfortable. She was watching him intently, one hand resting lightly on his back, the other positioned near his neck in a way that looked almost medical. As Marcus approached, she looked up and gave him that same small nod. "How's he doing?" Marcus asked, breathless from the run and the fear. He's stable, she said, a word choice that struck Marcus as oddly clinical. But Marcus, I think you need to push for immediate attention. His breathing is more labored than it should be for just a fever, and... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. His pulse is elevated beyond what I'd expect from the temperature alone. Marcus stared at her. Are you a nurse? Something flickered across her face. I have some medical training. Before Marcus could ask more, she was already standing, transferring Caleb back to his arms with the same careful precision she'd used before. Go register him, she said. Now, and when you talk to Triage, mention that his breathing seems labored and his pulse is rapid. Use those exact words. Will you? Marcus started, then stopped. He'd already asked too much of this stranger. Thank you, really. I don't know how to... Don't worry about it, she said. Just take care of him. Marcus hurried back to the registration desk, where Sandra was processing an elderly man with a walker. She looked up as he approached, her expression suggesting she'd hoped he might have changed his mind and gone home. Found them? Marcus said, sliding the insurance cards across the desk. And I need to speak to Triage immediately. My son's breathing is labored and his pulse is rapid. Sandra's typing stopped. She looked at Caleb more carefully this time, taking in his flushed skin and the way his chest rose and fell in quick, shallow movements. Did the triage nurse already see him? No, but someone with medical training looked at him and said, Who? Sandra was already reaching for her phone. Dr. Chen to Triage stat. Dr. Chen to Triage. Not Dr. Chen. That's my last name. Someone in the waiting room. A woman with medical training. Sandra frowned, glancing toward the seating area. We don't have any off-duty medical staff here today. You sure she said she was medical? Marcus turned to point toward the corner where the woman had been sitting. The chair was empty. He scanned the waiting room quickly, looking for her blue sweater, her dark ponytail, any sign of the person who'd just spent 10 minutes caring for his son like he was her own. She was gone. Sir? Sandra's voice seemed to come from far away. I need you to focus. Tell me exactly what symptoms you've observed. Marcus turned back to the desk, Caleb burning like a small furnace in his arms, and tried to remember everything the mysterious woman had told him to say. Labored breathing, rapid pulse. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they had an immediate effect. Sandra was already on the phone, speaking in rapid medical shorthand to someone on the other end. Room 3 is ready, she said, hanging up. They're sending someone out now. A nurse appeared almost immediately, young man with kind eyes and scrubs covered in cartoon dinosaurs. I'm Jake, he said, already assessing Caleb with quick professional glances. Let's get this little guy checked out. As they walked toward the triage room, Marcus found himself looking over his shoulder one more time, searching for any sign of the woman who'd held his son and somehow known exactly what to say. But the waiting room had already shifted, new families filling the spaces where others had been. The constant churn of human crisis and hope that kept places like this running 24 hours a day. Has he been eating? Jake asked, gently taking Caleb from Marcus's arms and laying him on the examination table. Not much. Just sips of water. Jake nodded, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around Caleb's thin arm. The boy stirred but didn't wake fully, his body limp with exhaustion and fever. And the breathing issues, when did you first notice those? Marcus started to say he hadn't, then stopped. Had Caleb's breathing been labored? Looking at him now, watching the rapid rise and fall of his small chest, it seemed obvious. How had he missed it? How had the woman in the waiting room seen it so quickly when he'd been watching his son for 3 days straight? Recently, he said finally. Someone in the waiting room pointed it out. Jake's hands stilled on the stethoscope. Someone in the waiting room? Medical professional? She said she had medical training. Did she give you her name? Marcus shook his head, feeling foolish. He'd trusted his son to a complete stranger and hadn't even asked her name. Some father he was. Jake finished his examination in focused silence, checking Caleb's temperature, listening to his chest, gently palpating his abdomen. With each test, his expression grew more serious. When he pressed on the lower right side of Caleb's belly, the boy whimpered and pulled away, even in his semi-conscious state. "I'm going to get the doctor," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral. "Keep him comfortable, we'll be right back." And then Marcus was alone with his son in a small room that smelled of antiseptic and fear, surrounded by equipment he didn't understand, waiting for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Through the thin curtain, he could hear the controlled chaos of the emergency room monitors beeping, staff calling out medical terms, families having conversations he'd been having just minutes before. Caleb stirred on the table, his eyes opening just enough to find Marcus's face. "Daddy?" "I'm here, buddy," Marcus said, smoothing the boy's sweaty hair back from his forehead. "I'm right here." "The lady," Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. "She was nice." Marcus's throat tightened. "Yeah, she was. She smelled like the doctor place." Hospital soap, Marcus realized. That clean antiseptic smell that clung to medical professionals even when they weren't working. The woman had smelled like a hospital because she worked in one. But why had she been in the waiting room? Why hadn't she identified herself as medical staff? Before he could puzzle it out further, the curtain parted and a doctor entered, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. Behind her, Jake carried a tablet and wore the expression of someone delivering news that wouldn't be welcome. "Mr. Chen, I'm Dr. Rodriguez. I've been looking at your son's symptoms, and I'm concerned about the possibility of appendicitis." The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Appendicitis. Surgery. His 4-year-old son's tiny body opened up by strangers with knives. "Are you sure?" "Not yet. We need to run some test blood work, possibly imaging. But the combination of fever, the way he responds to abdominal pressure, the breathing changes, it fits the profile." "The breathing changes," Marcus repeated. "How long has that been going on?" Dr. Rodriguez consulted her tablet. "According to your intake, you first noticed labored breathing today?" "Someone else noticed it." Marcus struggled to explain. "I've been so focused on the fever, I guess I missed the other symptoms." "It happens, Dr. Rodriguez said kindly. "Parents see what they expect to see. Fever is obvious. Subtle changes in breathing pattern take medical training to spot." Medical training? The woman in the waiting room had spotted it immediately, had known exactly what to tell him to say to get quick attention. She'd positioned Caleb to help his breathing, had felt for his pulse with practiced ease, had disappeared the moment medical staff took over. "Dr. Rodriguez," Marcus said suddenly, "is there any chance you have off-duty staff in your waiting room today?" A woman, mid-30s, dark hair? The doctor frowned. "Not that I'm aware of. Why?" "She's the one who identified the breathing problems. She seemed to know what she was talking about." Dr. Rodriguez and Jake exchanged a look. "Can you describe her more specifically?" Marcus tried to remember details beyond his panic. Blue sweater, jeans, sneakers, dark hair and a ponytail. She spoke with a slight accent. "Maybe Spanish?" She was sitting alone in the corner. Jake was already shaking his head. "I've been on since 6 this morning. I would have noticed one of our docs in the waiting room." "Maybe from another department?" Dr. Rodriguez suggested. "Or visiting from another hospital." "Maybe," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. Dr. Rodriguez turned back to Marcus. "Regardless of who she was, she may have helped us catch this early. If it is appendicitis, timing matters. We need to get those tests done now." As the medical team sprang into action around him, drawing blood from Caleb's thin arm and preparing him for transport to radiology, Marcus found himself thinking about the woman who'd held his son like he mattered to her, who'd seen what he'd missed, who'd known exactly how to get them the help they needed. Whoever she was, whatever her story, she'd appeared in his life for exactly as long as he'd needed her, and not a moment more. And now, as Caleb was wheeled away for tests that would determine whether his appendix was trying to kill him, Marcus realized he'd never even said goodbye. The blood work came back within an hour, but it felt like days. Marcus sat in the cramped family consultation room, staring at a motivational poster about hand hygiene, while trying not to think about all the ways his world could end in the next few minutes. Caleb had been admitted to a bed in the pediatric unit, his small body dwarfed by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. The IV in his arm looked enormous, the tape securing it covering most of his thin wrist. Dr. Rodriguez entered with a manila folder and the kind of expression doctors wore when they had to deliver news that would change everything. She sat across from Marcus at the small table, her hands folded over the test results like she was protecting him from their contents. "The blood work confirms what we suspected," she said gently. "Caleb's white blood cell count is significantly elevated, and his C-reactive protein levels indicate serious inflammation. Combined with his symptoms and the physical examination findings, we're looking at acute appendicitis." Marcus had been bracing for those words, but hearing them still felt like a punch to the chest. "Surgery?" "Emergency surgery. Dr. Kading A." Rodriguez confirmed. "His appendix is inflamed and showing signs that it could rupture at any time. If that happens," she didn't need to finish. Marcus had watched enough medical shows to know that a ruptured appendix could kill his son. "How long do we have?" "We need to get him into surgery as soon as possible. I've already called Dr. Harrison, our on-call pediatric surgeon. He's finishing up another case and should be available within the hour." "An hour." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the timeline. Caleb was lying in a hospital bed right now with a ticking time bomb in his abdomen, and they had to wait an hour for someone to defuse it. "Is there anyone else? Another surgeon?" "Dr. Harrison is our primary pediatric surgeon. He's excellent. I'd trust him with my own children. But if you're concerned about the timeline, we do have other options. Dr. Patel can perform the surgery, though his specialty is adult cases. Or we could transfer Caleb to Children's Hospital downtown, but that would mean at least another hour in transport." Marcus felt trapped in a maze of impossible choices. Wait for the specialist, while his son's appendix threatened to explode, risk it with a surgeon who wasn't used to operating on 4-year-olds, or lose more precious time moving Caleb to another hospital. "What would you do?" he asked finally. "If it was your child?" Dr. Rodriguez hesitated, the kind of pause that meant she was weighing professional protocols against personal honesty. "I'd want the pediatric surgeon," she said. "Dr. Harrison really is the best option for—" A soft knock interrupted her. The door opened to reveal Jake, the triage nurse, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the woman from the waiting room, the one who'd held Caleb while Marcus ran to his car, the one who'd somehow vanished when the medical team took over. Marcus shot to his feet. Where did you go? I looked for you." "I'm sorry," she said, stepping into the small room. "I had to take care of something." She looked different now, more composed, and Marcus noticed she was wearing a hospital badge clipped to her sweater. The name was partially obscured by her hair, but he could make out "Doctor" and what looked like Elena. Dr. Rodriguez frowned. "Elena, what are you doing here? I thought you were taking the day off." The woman, Elena, moved further into the room, her attention immediately going to the file in Dr. Rodriguez's hands. "I was, but I've been following this case since triage." She looked at Marcus. "Your son, Caleb. I wanted to check on his status." "Following the case?" Marcus repeated, confused. "But you were a stranger in the waiting room." Elena's expression softened. "I wasn't entirely honest with you earlier. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I'm a pediatric surgeon here at St. Mary's." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the hospital monitors beeping, overhead pages, the soft squeak of wheels on linoleum. Marcus felt like the ground had shifted beneath him, rearranging everything he thought he understood about the last few hours. "You're a doctor," he said slowly. "A pediatric surgeon." "I am. And you were sitting in the waiting room because—" Elena glanced at Dr. Rodriguez, who was watching the exchange with obvious interest. "I was having a difficult morning. Sometimes I sit in the waiting room to remind myself why we do this work, to see families before they become patients, before the medical system takes over." She paused. "I wasn't supposed to be working today." Marcus stared at her, pieces clicking into place. The way she'd held Caleb, the medical terminology she'd used, the hospital smell Jake had mentioned, her immediate recognition of symptoms he'd missed. You knew. When you were holding him, you knew what was wrong. I suspected, Elena admitted. The breathing pattern, the way he responded to movement, the specific quality of his fever, it all pointed to appendicitis. But I couldn't diagnose him in the waiting room. I needed him to get proper medical attention. Why didn't you just say you were a doctor? Elena looked down at her hands. Because I was off duty. Because I was supposed to be taking a break from all of this. Because, she took a breath. Because 3 days ago I lost a patient, a little girl, not much older than Caleb. Her appendix ruptured before her parents brought her in, and by the time we got her to surgery, it was too late. The weight of that confession settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus could see the pain in Elena's eyes, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than missing sleep. Dr. Cito Rodriguez spoke first. Elena, you couldn't have saved her, you know that. Sometimes, I know, Elena said quickly. Logically, I know. But when I saw Caleb in the waiting room, when his father asked me to watch him, she looked at Marcus. I couldn't walk away. Not again. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went beyond gratitude. This woman had been carrying her own crisis when he'd thrust his son into her arms, and instead of turning away, she'd stepped closer. Dr. Rodriguez, Elena continued, her voice becoming more clinical, I've been reviewing Caleb's test results and imaging. His appendix is significantly inflamed, and there are early signs of perforation. We're looking at a narrow window here. Dr. Rodriguez handed her the file. Dr. Harrison should be available within the hour. Elena studied the results, her expression growing more serious with each page. An hour might be too long. His white count is higher than I'd like, and these inflammatory markers. She looked up at Marcus. How long did you say he'd been symptomatic? 3 days of fever, but the other symptoms, the breathing, the abdominal pain. I don't know how long those have been going on. I feel like I missed everything. You didn't miss anything, Elena said firmly. Early appendicitis symptoms are subtle, especially in young children. Many parents don't catch it until it's much more advanced. She turned back to Dr. Rodriguez. I'd like to examine him myself. Elena, you're not on the schedule today. And after what happened with the Morrison girl died because her parents waited too long to bring her in, not because of anything we did wrong. Elena's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath. Caleb still has a chance, but only if we move fast. Dr. Rodriguez hesitated. Are you sure you're ready for this? It's only been 3 days since. I'm ready. Elena looked at Marcus. With your permission, I'd like to take Caleb to surgery myself. I know his case better than anyone else at this point, and I'm available now. Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Trust his son's life to a doctor he'd just learned was a doctor, or wait for the scheduled surgeon while Caleb's condition potentially worsened. But then he remembered the way Elena had held his son in the waiting room, the careful attention she'd paid to his breathing, the way she'd positioned him for comfort. She'd been treating Caleb as a patient from the moment she'd taken him into her arms. What are the risks? He asked. With any appendectomy, there's always risk. Elena said honestly, anesthesia complications, bleeding, infection, but the risks increase significantly if we wait and his appendix ruptures. Right now, this is still a straightforward laparoscopic procedure. If it ruptures, it becomes a much more complex surgery with a longer recovery time and higher chance of complications. And you've done this surgery before? Hundreds of times. Pediatric appendectomy is one of the most common procedures we perform. Marcus looked between Elena and Dr. Rodriguez, trying to read the subtext of their exchange. Dr. Rodriguez, what's your opinion? The older doctor sighed. Elena is one of the best pediatric surgeons I've ever worked with. If she says she's ready, then she's ready. And given the timeline concerns, she nodded slowly. I think she's your best option. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, trying to imagine explaining this decision to someone else later. He'd met this woman 3 hours ago when he desperately asked her to watch his son. Now, he was about to let her cut him open. It should have felt insane, but somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Okay," he said. "Yes. Let's do it." Elena nodded, already shifting into professional mode. "I'll need about 30 minutes to prep for surgery. We'll use general anesthesia, and the procedure should take between 45 minutes to an hour, depending on what we find when we get in there. What happens if? What happens if it's already ruptured? Then we clean everything out, place drains if necessary, and keep him on antibiotics for longer. The recovery time extends, but kids are resilient. Even in worst-case scenarios, the prognosis is usually good if we catch it before systemic infection sets in." Dr. Rodriguez stood. "I'll get the OR prepped and notify anesthesia. Elena, you'll want to check with Dr. Patel about covering your other cases tomorrow if recovery runs long." "Already done," Elena said. I called him from the hallway. As Dr. Rodriguez left to make arrangements, Marcus found himself alone with Elena for the first time since the waiting room. The dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the kind stranger who'd helped him in a crisis, but the surgeon who was about to operate on his son. Yet somehow, the fundamental trust remained unchanged. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Of course. When you were holding him in the waiting room, did you already know you were going to end up being his surgeon?" Elena considered the question. "I hope not to be. I hope someone else would catch what I'd seen and take over, but—" She paused. "I've learned that sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be, even when it's the last place you want to be." Marcus nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "I need to call my work. Let them know I won't be in. And Caleb's babysitter, she's probably wondering why I didn't drop him off this morning. Take your time. We won't start without you." As Elena turned to leave, Marcus called after her. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for everything. For watching him, for seeing what I missed, for being willing to do this." She paused at the door. "You don't need to thank me, Marcus. This is what I'm supposed to do. What I trained for." Her voice softened. "Besides, I have a feeling Caleb and I are going to be good friends." After she left, Marcus sat alone in the consultation room, staring at his phone and trying to figure out how to explain the last few hours to anyone who hadn't lived them. How do you tell people that a stranger in a waiting room turned out to be exactly the person your child needed? How do you explain that sometimes miracles come disguised as coincidences? He started with his supervisor at the construction site, a gruff man named Tony, who'd been surprisingly understanding when Marcus had to miss work for Caleb's doctor appointments or school events. "Tony, it's Marcus. I won't be in today. Caleb's in the hospital. They're taking him for emergency surgery." "Jesus, Marcus, what happened?" "Appendicitis." They caught it just in time, but Marcus found his voice breaking slightly. "It's going to be okay. The surgeon seems really good. Take all the time you need, kid. Don't worry about the job. Family comes first." Next was Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who watched Caleb before and after school. She'd been like a grandmother to him, and Marcus knew she'd be worried when he didn't show up for drop-off. "Mrs. Patterson, it's Marcus. I'm sorry I didn't call. Earlier, we're at the hospital. Caleb's appendix, they have to operate." "Oh my goodness. How is he? How are you holding up?" He's going to be okay. The doctor says they caught it in time. But I'll probably be here for a few days. Don't you worry about anything else. I'll water your plants, bring in your mail. You just focus on that little boy." As he finished the calls, Marcus realized he had one more person he wanted to contact, though he wasn't sure why. His ex-wife Sarah had remarried and moved to Phoenix 2 years ago. She sent birthday cards and Christmas presents, but they'd agreed that staying in regular contact would be confusing for Caleb. Still, something about facing surgery alone made him want to reach out. He started to dial her number, then stopped. What would he say? That her son was about to go under the knife, and he'd entrusted his life to a woman he'd met in a waiting room? That he was scared and wished he had someone to hold on to while he waited? Instead, he put the phone away and headed toward Caleb's room. Whatever happened next, he He'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else for the past 4 years alone, but determined to be strong enough for both of them. The pediatric wing was quieter than the emergency room, painted in soft blues and greens with cartoon characters on the walls. Caleb's room was small but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the hospital's courtyard garden. His son lay in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small under the white sheets, an oxygen cannula under his nose, and multiple monitors tracking his vital signs. Elena stood beside the bed, speaking quietly to a nurse while checking Caleb's chart. She'd changed into surgical scrub spale blue with a matching capand, moved with the efficient confidence of someone completely in her element. This was who she really was, Marcus realized. Not the woman in jeans sitting alone in a waiting room, but this a surgeon preparing to save his son's life. "How's he doing?" Marcus asked softly. "Stable," Elena replied. "We've given him some pre-operative medication to help him relax, and we'll be moving him to surgery in about 10 minutes. Caleb's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his father's voice. "Daddy?" "I'm here, buddy." Marcus took his son's small hand, careful not to disturb the four. "The doctors are going to help you feel better, okay? Will it hurt?" Elena moved closer to the bed, her voice gentle. "You're going to go to sleep, Caleb, just like at home. And when you wake up, your tummy won't hurt anymore." "Are you the nice lady from before?" Elena smiled. "I am. I'm Dr. Elena, and I'm going to take very good care of you." Caleb nodded solemnly, then looked at Marcus. "Will you be here when I wake up?" "I'll be right here," Marcus promised. "I'm not going anywhere." The transport team arrived, 2 orderlies and an anesthesiologist who introduced herself as Dr. Kim. As they prepared to move Caleb's bed, Elena pulled Marcus aside. "I want you to know that we'll be in constant communication during the surgery," she said. "If anything changes, if we encounter any complications, someone will come out to update you immediately." "How will I know if something goes wrong?" "You'll know because we'll tell you. No news is good news in this case. The surgery should take about an hour, but don't panic if it runs longer. Sometimes things take more time than we anticipate, especially if we need to clean out any infection." Marcus nodded, trying to memorize her words like they were instructions for keeping his son alive. "Mr. Chen?" Dr. Kim approached them. "We're ready to take Caleb back now." As they wheeled his son away, Caleb raised one small hand in a wave. "Bye, Daddy. Bye, Doctor." Elena. Marcus watched until the elevator doors closed, then stood in the empty hallway, feeling like his heart had just been wheeled away on a hospital gurney. Elena remained beside him, not speaking, just present in the way that somehow made the silence less empty. "How long until you know something?" he asked finally. "I'll send word out once we've made the first incision and confirmed what we're dealing with. Then regular updates throughout the procedure." "And if it's already ruptured?" Elena turned to face him fully. "Then we handle it. Marcus, I need you to understand something. I've been doing this for 8 years. I've seen appendicitis in every stage, from barely inflamed to completely perforated. Kids Caleb's age have amazing healing capacity. Even in the worst-case scenario, he's going to be okay." Marcus wanted to believe her, needed to believe her. But the rational part of his mind kept whispering about everything that could go wrong, about the woman 3 days ago who'd lost her daughter, about the thin line between routine surgery and tragedy. "The little girl you mentioned," he said quietly. "The one who died. What happened?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Her name was Sophie Morrison. She was 6. Her parents thought she had the flu symptoms, can be very similar in the early stages. By the time they brought her in, her appendix had been ruptured for at least 12 hours. The infection had spread throughout her abdomen. Could you have saved her if they'd brought her in sooner?" "Probably, yes." Elena's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the weight she carried in her eyes. "That's what makes pediatric surgery so difficult sometimes. We're entirely dependent on parents recognizing when something is seriously wrong, and the symptoms don't always cooperate." "Is that why you were in the waiting room today? Because of her?" "Partly. I needed to see families before they became cases, remind myself that behind every chart and test result is a parent who loves their child more than anything in the world." She paused. I needed to remember why losing someone like Sophie matters so much. Marcus understood then why she'd agreed so readily to watch Caleb, why she'd risked her day off to get involved. She wasn't just a surgeon who happened to be in the waiting room, she was someone trying to heal her own wounds by preventing someone else's. Dr. Vasquez, we're ready for you in OR 3. A voice called from down the hallway. Elena nodded, then turned back to Marcus. I have to go now. But Marcus? Thank you. For what? For trusting me with him, for giving me the chance to get this one right. Before he could respond, she was walking away, her scrubs disappearing around the corner toward the operating rooms. And Marcus was left alone in the pediatric wing, surrounded by the quiet sounds of children healing and parents hoping, waiting for word about whether his son would be among the lucky ones. He found the family waiting room a space designed to contain anxiety with soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and magazines no one ever actually read. A coffee machine hummed in the corner, and a television played morning talk shows with the sound turned down. Marcus chose a chair near the window and settled in for what he knew would be the longest hour of his life. As he sat there, watching clouds move across the sky above the hospital courtyard, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange series of events that had brought them to this moment. If he hadn't forgotten the insurance cards, he never would have approached Elena in the waiting room. If she hadn't been taking a mental health day, she wouldn't have been there to notice Caleb's symptoms. If she hadn't lost Sophie Morrison 3 days earlier, she might not have been so determined to save his son. It was either an incredible series of coincidences or something that looked suspiciously like fate. And for the first time in 4 years of raising Caleb alone, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as he'd thought. The first 20 minutes passed in silence. Marcus sat in the family waiting room, hands folded in his lap, staring at a painting of a lighthouse that someone had probably chosen because it was supposed to be calming. The coffee machine hummed its mechanical lullaby, and somewhere down the hall, a child was crying, not the sharp wail of pain, but the tired whimper of someone who'd been in the hospital too long. Marcus checked his phone. 10:47 a.m. Elena had said the surgery would take about an hour, maybe longer if they encountered complications. He tried not to think about what complications might look like when they involved cutting open his 4-year-old son. A woman entered the waiting room, maybe 50, with graying hair and the kind of comfortable shoes that suggested she spent long days on her feet. She nodded at Marcus, then settled into a chair across the room with a worn paperback novel. Her presence was oddly comforting proof that other people waited in rooms like this and survived the experience. At 11:15, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Marcus's heart jumped, but she was looking for the other woman, delivering news about someone named Robert who was doing well in recovery. The woman smiled, gathered her things, and left with visible relief. Marcus was alone again. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson. Thinking of you and Caleb. Let me know if you need anything. He typed back a quick thank you, then stared at the screen, wondering if there was anyone else he should notify. His parents had died in a car accident when Caleb was 2. Sarah's parents lived in Florida and sent Christmas cards, but hadn't visited since the divorce. His work crew would check in eventually, but they weren't the kind of men who talked about feelings or fears. The truth was, Marcus had become an expert at handling crises alone. When Caleb had broken his arm at 18 months, Marcus had spent 6 hours in the ER by himself, holding his screaming toddler while doctors set the bone. When Caleb had pneumonia at 3, Marcus had slept in a chair beside his hospital bed for 4 nights, refusing to leave even when the nurses offered to watch him. Being a single father meant becoming comfortable with carrying everything yourself, the worry, the decisions, the weight of being the only person standing between your child and the world. It had made him strong, but it had also made him tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. At 11:30, another nurse appeared. This time she was looking for him. Mr. Chen? I'm Rebecca from OR 3. Dr. Vasquez asked me to give you an update. Marcus stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his coffee. Is he okay? He's doing very well. Dr. Vasquez has made the initial incision and confirmed the diagnosis it is appendicitis, but they caught it just in time. No signs of rupture yet. She estimates another 30 to 40 minutes. Relief flooded through Marcus like warm water. So, everything's going according to plan? Exactly according to plan. Dr. Vasquez said to tell you that Caleb is stable, his vital signs are strong, and she's very pleased with what she's seeing. After Rebecca left, Marcus sank back into his chair, feeling like he could breathe fully for the first time in hours. No rupture, no complications. His son was going to be okay, but as the relief settled, it was replaced by something elsey. Strange loneliness that felt deeper than just being physically alone in the waiting room. He thought about Elena, somewhere in the hospital right now, with her hands inside his son's body, making decisions that would determine the rest of Caleb's life. She'd inserted herself into their crisis without hesitation, had taken responsibility for his child's survival like it was the most natural thing in the world. When was the last time someone had done that? When was the last time Marcus had been able to share the weight of caring for Caleb with another person? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, looking for someone to call, someone who would understand what this moment meant. His finger hovered over Sarah's number again. They'd been divorced for 3 years, but she was still Caleb's mother, still the only other person in the world who loved him the way Marcus did. Before he could talk himself out of it, he pressed call. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice was surprised, with an undertone of worry. "Is everything okay?" "Caleb's in surgery," he said without preamble. "Appendicitis. They caught it in time, but—" his voice broke slightly. "I thought you should know." There was a long pause. In the background, Marcus could hear the sounds of Sarah's new lifer husband, asking if everything was all right, a dog barking, normal domestic chaos that felt a world away from the sterile quiet of the hospital. "Oh my God, is he okay? Are you okay?" "He's going to be fine." The surgeon says they caught it before it ruptured. "But Sarah, I'm sitting here alone and I needed to tell someone who would understand." Another pause, longer this time. "Do you want me to come? I could get a flight today." Marcus closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to say yes, wanted someone there who knew Caleb's laugh, who remembered the way he used to fall asleep on people's chests as a baby. But Sarah had made her choice 3 years ago, when she'd decided that being a mother was too hard, that starting over in Phoenix with a man who could give her the kind of life she wanted was worth leaving her son behind. "No," he said finally. "He's going to be fine, and you have your life there. I just wanted you to know." "Marcus, Sarah's voice was thick with emotion he recognized but couldn't afford to comfort. "I think about him every day. I think about both of you. I know." And he did know. Sarah wasn't a monster, she was just someone who discovered that wanting to be a parent and being able to be one were different things. "But we're okay, we figured it out." After he hung up, Marcus felt emptier than before. The call had only reinforced how alone they really were, how much he'd learned to carry by himself. Caleb had been his whole world for 4 years, but Marcus was realizing that maybe he'd made his own world too small in the process. At noon, Elena appeared in the waiting room doorway, still in her surgical scrubs, but with her mask pulled down. Her hair was slightly damp with sweat, and there was a tiredness around her eyes that spoke of intense concentration, but she was smiling. Marcus shot to his feet. "How is he?" "Perfect," Elena said, walking toward him. "Absolutely perfect. We removed his appendix laparoscopically, 3 small incisions instead of 1 large one, which means faster healing and less scarring. No signs of rupture, minimal inflammation around the surgical site. He did beautifully." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. "So he's okay? Really okay?" "Really okay. He's in recovery now, waking up from anesthesia. You should be able to see him in about 30 minutes. "And his recovery? How long will he be in the hospital?" "Probably just overnight for observation, maybe 2 nights depending on how he feels. Kids bounce back from this surgery incredibly quickly. He'll be uncomfortable for a few days, but he should be back to normal activity within a week or 2. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, finally allowing himself to believe it was over. Dr. Vasquez, I don't know how to thank you. You saved his life. Elena shook her head. You saved his life by bringing him in when you did. I just did my job. She sat down in the chair next to his, and Marcus noticed how she slumped slightly, like the adrenaline that had carried her through surgery was finally wearing off. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. Why were you really in the waiting room today? I mean, I know you said you were having a difficult morning, but… Elena was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. Have you ever had a job that you love and hate in equal measure? Marcus thought about the construction site, the satisfaction of building something solid and useful, balanced against the physical toll, the uncertainty of seasonal work, the way his body ached at the end of long days. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I became a pediatric surgeon because I wanted to save children. It sounds simple when you say it like that, noble even. But the reality is more complicated. She looked up at him. For every child like Caleb, there's a Sophie Morrison. For every surgery that goes perfectly, there's one that doesn't. And after 8 years, the weight of the ones you can't save starts to feel heavier than the joy of the ones you can. Is that why you were taking the day off? Partly, but also because I realized I was starting to see children as medical problems instead of people. When Sophie died, I felt sad, but in a clinical way, another case that didn't go well, another statistic. It wasn't until I was driving home that I realized I hadn't even thought about her parents, about what they were going through. Marcus nodded. He'd seen that kind of emotional distance in doctors before, the professional detachment that probably kept them sane, but sometimes made them seem less human. So I decided to take a day off and remind myself what this job is really about. I was visiting a colleague in oncology when I saw you and Caleb in the waiting room. Elena smiled slightly. The universe has a sense of humor, doesn't it? Or maybe you were exactly where you needed to be. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the morning's events. Marcus found himself studying Elena's profile, noticing details he'd missed in the crisis and chaos. She was beautiful, but in a tired way, like someone who'd forgotten to take care of herself while taking care of everyone else. There were laugh lines around her eyes, but also stress lines on her forehead. She wore no wedding ring, he noticed, though there was a faint tan line where one might have been. Can I ask you something personal? Marcus said. Elena turned to look at him. After what we've been through today, I think personal questions are fair game. Do you have children of your own? Something flickered across Elena's face, not pain exactly, but a complicated emotion Marcus couldn't quite read. No, no children. By choice? That's a complicated question. Elena leaned back in her chair, seeming to weigh how much to share. I was married until 6 months ago. We tried for years to have children, but it never happened. Fertility treatments, specialists, the whole process. And somewhere along the way, my marriage fell apart. I'm sorry. Don't be. The divorce was the right choice, even if it was painful. My ex-husband wanted children so badly that it became the only thing our relationship was about. Every month became a cycle of hope and disappointment. Every holiday was a reminder of what we didn't have. Eventually, we forgot how to be happy with just each other. Marcus thought about his own marriage, how Sarah had struggled with motherhood even after Caleb was born. Some people seemed to be natural parents, while others had to fight for every moment of joy in it. Do you still want children? He asked. Elena considered the question seriously. I thought I'd made peace with not having them. My career is demanding, and after the divorce, I convinced myself I was better off alone. But today, holding Caleb in the waiting room, seeing how much you love him. She paused. I remembered what I'd been missing. There was something in her voice that made Marcus look at her more carefully. What do you mean? I mean, I spend my days taking care of other people's children, but I go home to an empty apartment. I save lives at work, but my personal life is. She gestured vaguely. Empty. Successful, but empty. Marcus understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. Since Sarah left, his life had been entirely about Caleb work to support him. Evenings helping with homework, weekends at the park or museums. It was a good life, a meaningful life, but it was also narrow. There were whole parts of himself he'd put away when he became a single father, aspects of his personality that had no place in the careful routine he'd built. "It's funny," Marcus said. "I was just thinking the opposite. My life is full, maybe too full. Every decision I make is about Caleb. Every plan revolves around his needs. Sometimes I wonder what I'd be like if I wasn't a father, if I had the luxury of thinking about myself first." "Do you miss it? Being able to be spontaneous?" Marcus considered the question. "I miss sleeping through the night. I miss being able to go to a movie without finding a babysitter. I miss having conversations about something other than dinosaurs and superheroes." He smiled. "But I don't miss being the kind of person who could walk away when things got difficult." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Is that what your ex-wife did?" "In a way." Sarah struggled with motherhood from the beginning. Postpartum depression, anxiety, the feeling that she'd lost herself completely. I tried to help, tried to support her, but she kept pulling away. Eventually, she decided it would be easier to start over somewhere else with someone who didn't need so much from her. That must have been devastating. Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering those final months when Sarah had been physically present but emotionally gone, when he'd felt like he was raising both Caleb and his wife. It was. But you know what the strangest part was? After she left, after the initial shock wore off, I realized I was happier. Not because I was glad she was gone, but because I could finally stop trying to hold everything together for someone who didn't want to be held together. Elena nodded slowly. "I understand that. Sometimes loving someone means accepting that you can't save them from themselves. Is that what happened with your marriage?" "In a way. My ex-husband became so focused on what we didn't have that he stopped seeing what we did have. And I became so focused on trying to make him happy that I forgot how to be happy myself." Elena stretched, working out tension in her shoulders. "The day I moved out, I cried for hours. But the next morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't felt that peaceful in years." They were interrupted by Rebecca, the OR nurse, who appeared in the doorway with a smile. "Mr. Chen, Caleb is awake and asking for his daddy." Marcus stood immediately, his heart jumping with excitement and relief. "He's really okay. See for yourself, room 312. As they walked toward the elevator, Elena beside him, Marcus realized the waiting was over, but something else was beginning. For the first time in 4 years, he'd shared the weight of a crisis with another person. For the first time since Sarah left, he'd talked to a woman about something deeper than Caleb's school schedule or his upcoming dentist appointment. "Dr. Vasquez," he said as they reached the elevator, "would you like to come see him? I mean, if you have time, I know you're probably busy." "I'd love to," Elena said without hesitation. "If you're sure you don't mind." "Mind? You saved his life. I think that earns you visiting privileges." The elevator ride was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself acutely aware of Elena's presence beside him, the way she smelled faintly of hospital soap and something floral, the way she stood with the confident posture of someone who belonged in medical settings, the way she seemed to carry herself with a mix of strength and vulnerability that reminded him of himself. When the elevator doors opened on the pediatric floor, Marcus felt like they were stepping into a different phase of their relationship. The crisis that had brought them together was over, but whatever came next would be their choice. Room 312 was bright and cheerful, with cartoon animals painted on the walls and a window that looked out over the hospital's healing garden. Caleb lay in the adjustable bed, looking small but alert, with an IV in his arm and monitoring leads attached to his chest. When he saw Marcus, his face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made every sleepless night and worried day worth it. "Daddy." Caleb's voice was hoarse from the breathing tube, but his smile was radiant. "I had the strangest dream. There were dancing robots and flying pizza." Marcus laughed, tears he hadn't realized he was holding back spilling over. "That sounds like a pretty good dream, buddy." It was. "And look," Caleb pointed to a small bandage on his abdomen. "The doctors fixed my tummy. It doesn't hurt anymore." Elena stepped forward, her professional demeanor softening into something warmer. "How are you feeling, Caleb?" Caleb's eyes widened with recognition. "Dr. Elena, you were there when I went to sleep." "I was, and I'm so proud of how brave you were. Did you really take out my appendix?" "I did. Would you like to see a picture?" Elena pulled out her phone and showed Caleb a photo of his removed appendix, explaining in simple terms what had been wrong and how they'd fixed it. Marcus watched, amazed by how naturally she interacted with his son, how she managed to be both medical, professional, and caring adult without missing a beat. As they talked, a nurse came in to check Caleb's vital signs and adjust his pain medication. The routine of hospital care resumed around them, but Marcus found himself reluctant to leave, reluctant to break the spell of this moment when his son was safe and the woman who'd saved him was still there, still part of their story. "Dr. Vasquez," Caleb said suddenly, "are you going to come visit me at home when I get better?" Elena glanced at Marcus, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Well, I don't know. That would be up to your daddy." Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the choice point that would determine whether Elena remained a heroic stranger or became something more. He thought about the empty apartment she'd mentioned, about his own carefully constructed but narrow life, about the conversation they'd just shared in the waiting room. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that would be very nice, if Dr. Elena wants to." Elena's smile was soft and real. "I'd like that very much." And as the afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window, casting warm light over the three of them, Marcus realized that sometimes the most important moments in life arrived disguised as emergencies, and sometimes the people you needed most were the ones you met when you had nothing left to lose. Caleb came home from the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, 48 hours after surgery, with a list of post-operative instructions that seemed longer than most novels. No lifting anything heavier than a gallon of milk. No running or jumping for 2 weeks. Keep the incision sites dry for 5 days. Watch for signs of infection, redness, swelling, fever over 101. Return immediately if he experiences severe abdominal pain, vomiting, or unusual fatigue. Marcus read the discharge papers 3 times while waiting for the wheelchair that would take Caleb to the car, trying to memorize every detail. The nurses made it sound routine. Kids recovered from appendectomies all the time, they assured him, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to take his son home with a ticking time bomb of potential complications. Elena appeared just as they were getting ready to leave, no longer in surgical scrubs, but wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a soft gray sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. She carried a small gift bag and wore the kind of smile that suggested she'd been looking forward to this moment. "Ready to go home, Caleb?" she asked, crouching beside his wheelchair. "I think so," Caleb said, his voice still carrying traces of the hoarseness from surgery. "But Daddy looks worried." Elena glanced up at Marcus, who was clutching the discharge papers like they contained the secrets of the universe. "It's normal for parents to be nervous after surgery. Your daddy just wants to make sure you heal properly." "Will you come check on me?" Caleb asked. "To make sure I'm getting better?" Elena looked at Marcus again, that same uncertainty from the hospital room flickering across her face. They'd talked for hours during Caleb's recovery, sharing stories and gradually building the kind of tentative friendship that emerges from shared crisis, but they hadn't discussed what would happen after discharge. The hospital was neutral territory. Real life was more complicated. "If your dad doesn't mind," Elena said carefully, "I'd like to check on you in a few days. Make sure everything is healing the way it should." Marcus nodded, perhaps too quickly. "That would be great. I mean, medically speaking. It would be good to have a professional opinion." Elena smiled, and Marcus caught something in her expression that suggested she understood the subtext of his nervousness, not just about Caleb's recovery, but about navigating whatever this relationship was becoming. The gift bag contained a small stuffed dinosaur, a T-Rex, wearing a tiny doctor's coat and stethoscope. Caleb clutched it immediately, declaring that Dr. Rex would help him get better. Elena had clearly given this gift some thought, choosing something that bridged Caleb's interests with his recent medical experience. "Dr. Rex knows all about surgery," she explained seriously. He can answer any questions you have about getting better. The ride home was quiet, Caleb dozing in his booster seat while Marcus navigated the familiar streets that somehow looked different now. Everything looked different, actually sharper, more precious, like he was seeing the world through the lens of almost losing it. The apartment building where they'd lived for 3 years, the corner market where he bought Caleb's favorite cereal, the playground where his son had learned to swing, all of it felt like gifts he'd been taking for granted. Their apartment was exactly as they'd left it 2 days earlier, but it felt smaller somehow, less equipped to handle the careful attention Caleb's recovery would require. Marcus realized he'd have to take time off work at least a week, maybe more to monitor his son's healing and make sure he didn't overexert himself. The financial implications hit him like cold water. Construction work meant hourly pay. No work meant no money, and they were already operating on a budget that left little room for emergencies. But Caleb was alive and safe and home, and that was worth any amount of financial stress. The first few days established a routine of careful vigilance. Marcus slept on the couch to be closer to Caleb's room, waking every few hours to check on his son's breathing and temperature. Caleb was patient with the restrictions, content to spend his days on the couch watching movies and working on puzzles, but Marcus could see his energy returning gradually, like a plant slowly turning towards sunlight. Elena called on Friday to check in, and Marcus found himself looking forward to her voice more than he wanted to admit. She asked detailed questions about Caleb's appetite, sleep patterns, and pain levels, but the conversation always drifted into more personal territory: how Marcus was handling the stress, whether he needed anything, what Caleb was doing to occupy his time during recovery. "I could stop by tomorrow," she offered during their third phone call, "just to take a look at the incision sites, make sure everything is healing properly." Marcus hesitated, not because he didn't want to see her, but because he was acutely aware of what his apartment looked like compared to the polished world she probably inhabited. The furniture was second-hand, the carpet was worn, and there were toy cars scattered across every available surface. It was clean and comfortable, but it wasn't elegant. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I mean, if you're busy." "I'm not busy," Elena said simply, "and I'd like to see how he's doing." Saturday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made staying inside feel like a virtue. Marcus spent the morning cleaning with an intensity that had nothing to do with hygiene and everything to do with nerves. He moved Caleb's toys to strategic locations that suggested organization without hiding the reality of living with a 4-year-old. He brewed coffee and tried to remember if Elena had mentioned liking coffee during any of their hospital conversations. When Elena knocked, Caleb scrambled off the couch with more energy than he'd shown since surgery. "Dr. Elena, you came." "I told you I would," she said, stepping into the apartment with the kind of ease that suggested she didn't see any of the imperfections Marcus had been worrying about. She looked around with genuine interest, taking in the carefully organized chaos of single parenthood. "This is nice. It feels like home." Marcus relaxed slightly. "It's small, but it works for us. Small can be good. Cozy." Elena sat on the couch next to Caleb, who immediately began showing her his collection of get-well cards from Mrs. Patterson, his preschool class, and various neighbors. "How are you feeling? Any pain?" "Only a little bit," Caleb said proudly. "And Dr. Rex has been helping me feel better." The stuffed dinosaur had indeed become Caleb's constant companion, accompanying him to the bathroom and sitting beside him during meals like a miniature medical consultant. Elena examined the incision sites with gentle efficiency, pronouncing everything perfect and praising Caleb for being such a good patient. "Can I play outside next week?" Caleb asked. "Gentle play," Elena said. "No running or climbing for a few more days, but you can walk around, maybe play with quiet toys in the yard." As the afternoon stretched on, Elena seemed reluctant to leave. She accepted Marcus's offer of coffee and settled into their conversation with the kind of comfortable familiarity that usually took months to develop. They talked about Caleb's preschool, Marcus's work, Elena's complicated relationship with her demanding career, the challenge of building a life that felt meaningful rather than just successful. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said during a lull in conversation. Caleb had fallen asleep on the couch between them, exhausted by the excitement of having a visitor. "Sure. Why are you really here?" "I mean, I'm grateful, but most surgeons don't make house calls to check on routine appendectomies." Elena was quiet for a moment, watching Caleb sleep. "Honestly, I've been asking myself the same question. And what answer have you come up with?" "That maybe routine is overrated." She looked at Marcus. "I've spent 8 years keeping professional distance from my patients and their families. It's supposed to protect you from getting too emotionally invested, from burning out. But somewhere along the way, I think I protected myself from caring about anything." Marcus nodded. He understood the appeal of emotional distance, the way it could shield you from disappointment and loss. But he also understood its limitations. "When I held Caleb in that waiting room," Elena continued, "when I saw how much you love him, how hard you're working to take care of him on your own, it reminded me of why I became a doctor in the first place. Not to solve medical problems, but to help families stay together." "And now?" Elena smiled, but there was something vulnerable in it. "Now I'm trying to figure out how to care about people without losing myself in the process." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone, buzzing with a text message. He glanced at it and felt his stomach drop. A reminder from the hospital billing department that his insurance claim was still being processed and that he'd be responsible for any uncovered expenses. Elena noticed his expression change. "Everything okay?" Marcus tried to wave it off. "Just hospital stuff, insurance paperwork." But Elena was perceptive, and Marcus had never been good at hiding financial stress. She'd probably seen enough families struggle with medical bills to recognize the signs. "Marcus, if you're worried about the costs—" "We'll figure it out," he said quickly. "We always do." Elena studied his face for a moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. "Actually, there's something I should mention. I recommended your case for the hospital's charity care program. Given your circumstances, single parent, income level, emergency nature of the surgery, you should qualify for significant assistance, possibly full coverage." Marcus stared at her. "You did what?" "It's completely legitimate. The program exists specifically for situations like yours. I just made sure the right people knew about your case." "Elena, we can't accept charity." "It's not charity. It's a program funded by the hospital and community donors, specifically to help families who need emergency care. You pay taxes that support public health initiatives, right? This is part of the same system." Marcus felt the familiar war between pride and practicality that had defined much of his adult life. He wanted to refuse, to insist on paying his own way, but the reality was that the surgery would probably cost more than he made in several months. Refusing help wouldn't just hurt him, it would hurt Caleb, limiting their ability to handle future emergencies or invest in his son's education and opportunities. "I don't know what to say." "Say thank you and let it go," Elena said gently. "Let someone help you for once." The words hit harder than she probably intended, mainly because they were true. Marcus had spent 4 years building a life that required nothing from anyone, that could survive any crisis through sheer determination and careful planning. But sitting in his small apartment with his recovering son and the woman who'd saved his life, he realized that maybe self-sufficiency was overrated. "Thank you," he said finally. "Really. Thank you." Elena's smile was soft and genuine. "You're welcome." The weeks that followed established a routine that none of them had planned, but all of them came to treasure. Elena stopped by every few days, officially to monitor Caleb's recovery, but increasingly just to be part of their small family unit. She brought groceries when she noticed their refrigerator was nearly empty, helped Caleb with puzzles when Marcus needed to handle phone calls or paperwork, and gradually became the kind of steady presence that Marcus hadn't realized they'd been missing. Caleb's recovery progressed exactly as expected. The incision sites healed cleanly, his energy returned in measured doses, and within 2 weeks he was begging to return to preschool and resume normal activities. Elena pronounced him fully recovered and cleared him for all regular activities, but her visits didn't stop. "I should probably give you guys some space," she said one evening after dinner, a meal that had somehow become a regular Tuesday tradition. "Caleb doesn't need medical supervision anymore." "But we like having you here," Caleb protested from his position on the living room floor, where he was building an elaborate castle with blocks Elena had brought him. "You're part of our family now." Elena glanced at Marcus, uncertainty flickering across her face. They'd been dancing around the question of what their relationship was becoming for weeks now, both careful not to assume too much or push too hard. "Caleb's right," Marcus said quietly. "You are part of our family now, if you want to be." The words hung in the air between them, heavier with possibility than Marcus had intended. Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching Caleb arrange his blocks with the focused intensity of a master architect. "I've never been part of a family like this," she said finally. "I don't know the rules." "There aren't any rules," Marcus replied. "There's just showing up and caring about each other and figuring it out as you go." "That sounds terrifying." Marcus laughed. "It is terrifying, but it's also the best thing in the world." Elena stayed for another hour that night, helping Caleb finish his castle and reading him a bedtime story, with the kind of patient attention that suggested she genuinely enjoyed the ritual. After Caleb was asleep, she and Marcus sat on the couch with glasses of Winnie bottle she'd brought weeks ago that they'd been saving for no particular reason. "Can I tell you something?" Elena said, curled into the corner of the couch with her legs tucked under her. "Of course. I used to think that wanting a family was a weakness, like I should be strong enough to build a complete life on my own, successful enough to not need anyone else's approval or companionship." Marcus nodded. "I get that. After Sarah left, I convinced myself that Caleb and I were better off alone, that depending on other people was just setting ourselves up for disappointment. And now?" Marcus looked toward Caleb's bedroom, where soft light spilled from the nightlight they'd left on. "Now I think maybe the strongest thing you can do is admit that you need people, that you want to be needed by them too." Elena smiled. "Is that what this is? Us needing each other?" "I think it's us choosing each other," Marcus corrected. "Which is even better." They talked until late that night, sharing stories about their childhoods, their failed marriages, their dreams for the future that had seemed impossible when they were alone but felt achievable now that they had each other. Elena talked about wanting to find a better balance between her demanding career and personal life. Marcus talked about his hopes for Caleb's education and his own desire to maybe go back to school someday, to learn about architecture or engineering. When Elena finally left that night, Marcus realized that somewhere in the weeks since Caleb's surgery, they'd built something real together. Not a romance, exactly, though there was certainly attraction and affection, but something deeper and more stable. A partnership based on mutual respect and shared commitment to Caleb's well-being. 3 months after the surgery, Elena was spending most weekends at their apartment, and Marcus had started keeping a toothbrush and change of clothes at her place. They moved slowly, carefully, both of them veterans of relationships that had rushed toward commitment and crashed into incompatibility. But this felt differentless, urgent but more solid, like they were building a foundation rather than chasing a feeling. Caleb thrived with the expanded attention and stability. He called Elena by her first name, but included her in all the family drawings he made at preschool. When asked about his family, he would list Daddy and Elena and Dr. Rex, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who'd never known family to be anything other than fluid and welcoming. The night Elena officially moved in, 6 months after that first meeting in the hospital waiting room, they celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a cake that Caleb had helped Marcus bake. It wasn't elegant or elaborate, but it was perfect in its simplicity. "To new beginnings," Elena said, raising her glass of wine. "To finding each other," Marcus countered. "To family," Caleb added, holding up his cup of apple juice with the solemnity of someone proposing a toast at a state dinner. As they clinked glasses in their small apartment, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of toys and medical journals and half-finished home improvement projects, Marcus reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. A year ago, he'd been a single father grinding through each day with determination but little joy. Elena had been a successful surgeon going through the motions of a life that felt empty despite her professional achievements. Now they were something new, a family that had formed not through traditional romance or biological connection, but through the simple recognition that they were better together than apart. They were two adults who'd learned to trust each other with the most important things in their lives: Caleb's well-being, their individual dreams, their shared future. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that it had all started with 5 minutes. 5 minutes when he'd been desperate enough to ask a stranger to watch his son. 5 minutes when Elena had been sitting alone in a waiting room, questioning everything about her life. 5 minutes that had stretched into hours, then days, then months of building something neither of them had known they were looking for. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been in the waiting room that day? Marcus asked Elena one night as they cleaned up after dinner, Caleb already absorbed in his bedtime routine. Elena paused in loading the dishwasher, considering the question. Sometimes, I think about how close I came to not being there at all. If I'd called in sick instead of coming to visit Dr. Martinez, if I'd sat somewhere else in the waiting room, if I'd been too lost in my own problems to notice you. But you were there. I was there. Elena smiled. And you were brave enough to ask for help. I was desperate enough to ask for help, Marcus corrected. Sometimes those are the same thing. Later that night, after Caleb was asleep and they'd settled into their own bedtime routine, Marcus found himself thinking about the concept of fate versus choice. Had they been destined to find each other, or had they simply been two people who made a series of good decisions when presented with unexpected opportunities? He supposed it didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd chosen to trust each other, chosen to stay, chosen to build something together, despite all the reasons they could have found to walk away. Elena stirred beside him, reaching out in her sleep to rest her hand on his chest in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Marcus covered her hand with his own, thinking about how much trust was contained in that simple touch, the trust of someone who'd learned to sleep peacefully next to another person, who'd learned to share space and decisions and responsibility. Outside their bedroom window, the city hummed with its late-night energy, full of other families navigating their own challenges and celebrations. But here, in their small apartment that had somehow become big enough to contain all their hopes and fears, Marcus felt the kind of contentment he'd stopped believing was possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Caleb's first day at a new preschool, Elena's ongoing efforts to achieve better work-life balance, Marcus's classes for the electrician certification he'd decided to pursue. But tonight, they were exactly where they needed to be, together, safe, and committed to figuring out the rest as they went. 5 minutes of trust had indeed changed everything. But more importantly, it had given them the foundation to keep choosing each other, one day at a time, for whatever came next.